China is friends with Russia, but it helps Ukraine, and that's why. No one expected this, but it is true, and now I will tell you how China, which has very strong, friendly ties with Russia, helps Ukraine fight against Russia. Do not forget to subscribe and also enjoy. To begin with, why China and Russia are such good friends. Geographical proximity. China and Russia have a long border and a history of close geographical proximity, which has facilitated economic and strategic cooperation between the two countries. Strategic interests. Both countries share strategic interests in countering the dominance of the United States in global affairs, as well as in promoting a multipolar world order. Economic cooperation. China and Russia have developed strong economic ties, especially in the energy sector. Russia supplies energy resources to China, and the two countries have also concluded infrastructure and trade agreements for further economic cooperation. Military cooperation. Both China and Russia conduct joint military exercises and participate in military technical cooperation, including signing arms supply deals and joint production of military equipment. General opposition to Western intervention. Both countries have a history of opposing Western-led interventions and have expressed support for each other's positions on issues such as sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs. In general, the convergence of interests in politics, economics and security contributed to the establishment of strong relations between China and Russia. China will provide Ukraine with $1.5 million in humanitarian aid. The Chinese authorities will allocate a new batch of humanitarian aid to Ukraine in the amount of about $1.5 million in connection with the Russian military operation, said Wang Wenbin, a representative of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. China and Ukraine cooperate in various fields, including trade, investment and infrastructure development. In recent years, there has been a growing partnership between the two countries, with China providing investment and assistance in projects such as the construction of roads, bridges and ports in Ukraine. China is also an important trading partner of Ukraine, importing various goods and products from this country. In addition, the two countries cooperate in the field of science and technology, carrying out joint research projects and exchanges between academic institutions. In general, China and Ukraine are striving to deepen their cooperation in a number of areas, and their partnership continues to develop and expand, despite the situation in the struggle between the two countries. I have already told you that the Chinese economy is strong and beyond the control of even the great American power, and going deeper and deeper into China's politics and sovereignty, everything becomes clear. It is beneficial for China to be helped, it is not profitable for China to be refused. She maintains such friendly relations with Russia solely at the expense of her own benefit and no more. Now I will give examples that will show and prove that China is not such an ideal country, both in terms of politics and in terms of military operations. Disputes in the South China Sea. China has been involved in territorial disputes in the South China Sea with several countries, including the Philippines, Vietnam and Malaysia. China has built artificial islands and military installations in the region, which has led to tensions with neighboring countries and raised concerns about freedom of navigation in the area. Debt trap diplomacy. China has been criticized for engaging in debt trap diplomacy in various countries, especially in Africa and the Pacific, by providing loans for infrastructure projects that recipient countries struggle to repay. This has led to concerns about China's influence and leverage over these countries. Trading practice. China is accused of unfair trade practices, including theft of intellectual property, forced technology transfer and dumping of cheap goods, which have damaged industries in various countries and led to trade tensions with the United States and other countries. Human rights issues. The human rights situation in China, especially in its treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, and the suppression of democratic movements in Hong Kong, has led to widespread condemnation and sanctions from a number of countries. It is important to note that these are complex and sensitive issues, and the points of view and positions regarding China's actions vary from country to country and international organizations. What do you think? Why is China cooperating so closely with Russia? At the expense of its territories and resources? In general, by cooperating with Russia, China can strengthen its position on the world stage, expand its economic and strategic interests, and establish stronger partnerships with a key regional power. The Chinese economy has been steadily developing over the years, demonstrating steady GDP growth and the growing well-being of its citizens. However, there are also problems such as high debt levels and ongoing trade tensions with the United States. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the Chinese economy, leading to a slowdown in growth in the first months of 2020. In general, the Chinese economy remains one of the largest and most important in the world, and its progress is still closely monitored by economists and politicians around the world, and its strength lies in only one secret: cooperation with all countries in the world, even during a conflict situation between two countries, with one of which she has been friends for a very long time, she will partially help the other side. Not even become an enemy to the rest of the world and continue playing monopoly on. EU countries are expressing concern about China for several reasons. Economic competition. China's rapid economic growth and industrial expansion have made it a major player in the global economy. EU countries are concerned about the competitive advantages of Chinese companies, which benefit from government support, subsidies, and lower labor costs. They fear that Chinese companies could undermine European industry and lead to job losses. Unfair trade practices. EU countries have expressed concern about China's unfair trade practices, such as theft of intellectual property, forced technology transfer, and restrictions on market access. This practice creates unequal conditions for European business and prevents fair competition. Human rights and democracy. EU countries value human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. They criticized the human rights situation in China, especially with regard to issues such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the treatment of ethnic minorities. The suppression of dissent in Hong Kong and the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang have attracted significant international criticism. Cybersecurity and espionage. There have been reports of Chinese involvement in cyber espionage and intellectual property theft, targeting European companies and governments. EU countries are concerned about the potential risks posed by Chinese technology companies and their involvement in critical infrastructure projects. Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, a large-scale infrastructure and investment project, has caused concern among EU countries. They are concerned about the strategic implications of expanding China's influence through BRI projects, as well as the potential debt burden this could impose on recipient countries. Disinformation and influence operations. EU countries have expressed concern about Chinese disinformation campaigns and influence operations aimed at shaping public opinion and political discourse. They are afraid of attempts to manipulate public perceptions and influence decision-making processes. It is important to note that although EU countries have concerns about China, they also maintain even the United States cannot break the Chinese economy, and that's why. Every country has an economic structure that has been built for years, somewhere it is weak, somewhere it is strong, and somewhere it is reinforced concrete, like in China, and even the United States cannot harm the Chinese economy, and I will tell you why now, but in the meantime subscribe to the channel. Enjoy it. The strength of the Chinese economy is multifaceted and has developed over time due to radical changes. Current strengths. The second largest economy. China is the second largest economy in the world by nominal GDP. The largest manufacturing economy. China has the largest manufacturing sector in the world, exporting a wide range of goods. Foreign exchange reserves. China has the world's largest foreign exchange reserves, which provides significant economic leverage and stability. Technological advances. China has made tremendous strides in technology and is a world leader in sectors such as telecommunications, artificial intelligence, and green energy. The One Belt and One Road Initiative. This global development strategy is aimed at strengthening regional ties and ensuring a brighter economic future through investments in infrastructure. The domestic market. A large and growing domestic consumer market provides resilience to global economic fluctuations. State capitalism. China's central government controls key sectors of the economy, which gives it unusual leverage to achieve long-term economic goals. Problems. Debt levels. There are concerns about the debt levels of Chinese corporations, local governments, and shadow banking systems. Demographic shifts. Due to the one-child policy, currently relaxed, an aging population poses a problem for a labor-oriented economy. Income inequality. Rapid development has led to significant inequalities in wealth and income. Environmental problems. The growth of industry in cities has created serious environmental problems that the country is currently actively addressing. Conclusion. The development of the Chinese economy represented a process of transformation from a centrally planned system that was largely closed to international trade to a more market-oriented economy with a rapidly growing private sector, which is a major player in the global economy. As China continues to develop, it faces both opportunities and challenges that will determine its future economic trajectory. In a broad sense, the history of U.S. interaction with the Chinese economy can be viewed through various prisms, such as competition, trade policy, sanctions, and investment restrictions. Some may view these tactics as measures to protect national interests or, from another point of view, as an encroachment on China's economic sovereignty and growth. Here are some relevant examples. Trade tariffs and a trade war. One of the most notable examples is the trade war launched under the Trump administration, which began imposing tariffs on Chinese goods in early 2018. The U.S. has accused China of unfair trade practices, such as theft of intellectual property, forced technology transfer, and the provision of significant subsidies to domestic industry, which, according to the U.S., harm global markets. The tariffs have affected billions of dollars worth of Chinese products, and China has responded in kind by imposing tariffs on American products. This trade war has led to rising costs, supply chain disruptions, and a reassessment of trade relations around the world. Sanctions against Chinese companies. The United States government has imposed sanctions and placed several Chinese companies on trade blacklists, citing national security concerns and human rights issues. For example, the U.S. Department of Commerce has added companies such as Huawei and ZTE to its list of legal entities, which prohibits American companies from doing business with them without a license. These restrictions limit the ability of Chinese technology companies to access American technologies, including semiconductors, which are vital for many modern electronic devices. Investment restrictions. The U.S. has scrutinized and, in some cases, restricted Chinese investments in the United States, especially in sectors considered critical to national security. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, has been particularly active in reviewing and sometimes blocking transactions involving Chinese investors. For example, in 2018, President Trump blocked the proposed acquisition of Qualcomm by Singapore-based Broadcom, citing concerns that it would potentially benefit Chinese competitors in the race to develop 5G technology. Legislation restricting Chinese companies. The U.S. Congress has passed laws that include provisions specifically targeting Chinese companies. For example, the law on holding foreign companies accountable was signed in December 2020. This law threatens to exclude Chinese companies from the list of U.S. stock exchanges if they do not comply with American auditing standards. Export control. The United States has also strengthened its regulation and control over the export of certain technologies to China. For example, the Export Control Reform Act (ECRA) and the Foreign Investment Risk Analysis Modernization Act (FIRMA) were passed to strengthen export controls and inspections of foreign investments in the United States, with a focus on technologies with potential military. It is important to note that while these U.S. actions affect the Chinese economy, they also have implications for American and global businesses. Moreover, the Chinese government has taken various countermeasures and continues to develop its domestic industry to reduce dependence on foreign technologies and markets. The dynamics of economic relations between the United States and China are complex and interdependent, and the strategies applied by each country affect the global economic and geopolitical landscape. China's phenomenal GDP growth over the past few decades can be explained by a combination of factors, including economic policy reforms, large-scale capital investment, both domestic and foreign, abundant and relatively cheap labor, industrialization, and a strong emphasis on export-oriented industries. Here are some key aspects of China's economic growth story. Economic reforms. The deep economic reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping in 1978 marked China's transition from a centrally planned economy to a more market-oriented one, albeit within the framework of a one-party state. These reforms gradually weakened state control over business, allowed private entrepreneurship, and opened the door to foreign investment, competition, and private property rights. Growth due to exports. China is positioning itself as a global manufacturing hub with an export-oriented growth strategy. Thanks to its large workforce and low production costs, it was able to surpass manufacturers from other countries. As a result, it has accumulated a huge trade surplus, especially with developed countries such as the United States. Foreign direct investment, FDI. China has attracted huge amounts of FDI, which has brought not only capital, but also technology, management know-how and connections to global markets. Special economic zones, SEZs, were created to attract foreign companies with favorable conditions, such as tax incentives and fewer regulatory obstacles. Infrastructure and industrialization. Large-scale investments in infrastructure have contributed to the growth of industrial sectors and improved logistics across the vast country. This infrastructure boom, encompassing everything from roads and railways to ports and telecommunications, has helped connect regional markets and integrate them into the global economy. Human capital. The huge population provided China with an abundance of labor, and over time, investments in education and training led to a more skilled workforce, supporting higher value-added manufacturing and the development of a significant technology sector. The domestic market and urbanization. Rapid urbanization has led to millions of people moving from rural areas to cities, which has increased demand for housing, goods and services, thereby stimulating the domestic market. The growing middle class has also contributed to an increase in consumption. The role of the government. The Chinese government has played a central role in the economy, setting investment and development priorities within the framework of 5-year plans. State-owned banks have channeled capital into strategic industries and infrastructure projects, sometimes regardless of short-term returns. Adaptation and innovation. At a later stage of its growth, China began to shift from being a global factory to developing its own technology sectors. Companies such as Huawei, Tencent, Alibaba and others have begun to add value through innovation in various fields, signaling a move up the value chain. Despite these growth factors, China's rapid expansion has not been without challenges, including environmental pollution, growing inequality, debt sustainability issues, and the need for further economic and institutional reforms. The nature of China's economic growth is also changing, as domestic consumption, innovation and services play an increasingly significant role in its economy, and the country seeks to move. Despite all these examples and cruel factors on the part of America, the Chinese economy has not shaken in any way. There were moments when exports sagged, for example, of the same wood that was purchased in the depths of Russia, but China quickly found a replacement for such exports. It buys cheap gas and oil from Russia, which is a friendly country for them, and sells it to the United States, earning very huge amounts of money to the state budget, thereby reinforcing its and without that, a strong economy. Be sure to Putin can't stop killing Russian billionaires because of sanctions. It's no secret that when Russia attacked Ukraine, sanctions were imposed on it, and a huge number. But here are a few reasons why sanctions don't work, and Putin doesn't stop killing Russian billionaires. International sanctions have indeed affected the Russian economy, businesses, and some individuals, particularly those in power. However, whether sanctions have had the intended political effects, or to what extent they have impacted the wider Russian economy, has been a matter of debate and varies over time. Here are some reasons sanctions may not have the intended or observable impact. Resourcefulness and resilience. Russia has a history of enduring hardships and is known for developing strategic responses to external challenges. Sanctions may spur domestic industries to become more self-sufficient and innovative to replace imported goods and technologies. Natural resources. Russia is one of the world's largest producers of natural resources like oil and gas. These commodities are in high demand, providing Russia with significant income that can cushion the impact of sanctions. Alternative markets. Russia has been building stronger ties with non-Western countries, such as China, India, and Brazil, potentially mitigating the impact of Western sanctions by diverting trade and investment to alternative partners. Domestic reforms. The Russian government has implemented measures, such as import substitution policies, to reduce dependency on foreign goods and services, and thereby lessen the impact of sanctions. Stockpiling foreign reserves. Russia has built up substantial foreign currency reserves, which can be used to stabilize its economy and support the ruble during periods of sanctions-induced economic distress. Capital controls and economic adjustments. The Russian government may implement capital controls and other economic policy adjustments to stabilize its economy and minimize the negative effects of sanctions. Public rallying. Sanctions can sometimes have the unintended effect of rallying domestic support for the leadership, particularly if the sanctions are perceived as unjust or as an external threat to national sovereignty. Cyber and asymmetrical countermeasures. Russia has developed significant capabilities in cyber warfare and other asymmetrical responses that can be used to counteract or undermine the effects of sanctions. Adaptability of oligarchs and elites. Targeted sanctions against individuals often aim to pressure the political elite. However, these individuals may have the means to adapt to sanctions, such as by shifting assets or finding new ways to conduct business that avoid sanctions. Long-term strategic planning. The Russian government may view resistance to sanctions as part of a longer-term strategic contest with the West and is prepared to tolerate certain economic costs as a result. National narrative and control of information. The state-controlled media in Russia can influence the public perception of sanctions, framing them within a nationalistic narrative that tolerates or even dismisses their impact. It's important to note that the situation is dynamic and the effects of sanctions could. It's important to clarify that the dynamics of international sanctions are complex and multifaceted, and responses to sanctions can take many forms. When a country like Russia is subjected to sanctions from the United States and its allies, it might take various steps to mitigate the impact and potentially turn the game around. Here's how Russia might respond to sanctions in ways that affect the imposing country or countries. Retaliatory sanctions. Russia has often responded to Western sanctions with its own set of counter-sanctions. These may include banning imports from the sanctioning countries, which can affect certain sectors in those economies. Resource leverage. Russia, being a major exporter of oil and natural gas, can potentially leverage its control over these resources as a form of economic response. By adjusting volumes or redirecting supplies, it can influence energy prices globally and create challenges for countries dependent on these imports. Seeking alternative partners. By forging closer ties with non-Western countries, Russia can create new trading partnerships and open up markets. This shift can reduce the effectiveness of sanctions from the West and at the same time can impact American businesses that may lose out on Russian markets or dealings. Domestic economic policies. Russia might implement economic policies that promote self-reliance and reduce dependence on imported goods, including those from sanctioning countries. Over time, this can lead to the development of industries that compete with American businesses. Reputation and prestige. Russia could use the sanctions as a way to build its image as a power that stands up to Western dominance, potentially influencing other countries to view it as a leader against perceived Western hegemony. Attracting foreign investment. By creating favorable conditions for non-Western investors or by offering better terms to countries not participating in sanctions, Russia can attract investment that might otherwise go to American markets. Influencing global institutions. Russia could work within international bodies and institutions to advocate for policies and rules that favor its interests or complicate American policy goals. Cyber operations. Although not a formal tit-for-tat response to economic sanctions, Russia has significant cyber capabilities and could engage in cyber operations that indirectly impact American economic interests. Asymmetric warfare and proxy conflicts. Beyond direct financial or economic measures, Russia might engage in asymmetrical tactics, such as supporting proxy forces or engaging in conflicts where U.S. interests are involved, creating broader strategic challenges for the United States. In any situation of international economic sanctions, it's worth noting that there are usually adverse effects for both the sanctioning and sanctioned countries. The global interconnectedness of markets and supply chains means that actions and counteractions can have unintended consequences, sometimes harming the economies of both the sanctioning and sanctioned nations. Unfortunately, the article titled "Why Sanctions Against Russia Won't Work" has stood the test of time. It would be better for everyone if the sanctions worked and the war ended. However, it didn't work out that way. What happened is what almost always happens with sanctions. In the show, a supporter of sanctions said that these economic decrees work because the Russian economy is collapsing. It is true that the Russian economy is shrinking, down 3.7% in the last quarter, compared to 3.5% growth in the first quarter of 2022, according to Trading Economics. This should not be too surprising. As my sources claimed in the Time article, the problem when a country comes under sanctions is that the population tends to rally around a metaphorical flag. In this case, this meant overwhelming support for the Kremlin. Last month, more than 80% of the population expressed support for Putin, according to Statista. This is more than it was in September. The sanctions also did not prevent Russia from selling oil, one of its key exports. Crude oil production is slightly lower than before the invasion, but still remains above 10 million barrels per day. How is America killing the Chinese internet? It is a cable station in Marseille, France. From the outside, it seems inconspicuous, but in fact it connects to an extensive data network, which accounts for 95% of the world's foreign internet traffic. As of 2021, the Marseille facility is connected to 16 main underwater cables serving such diverse regions as Hong Kong, Singapore, and India, Oman, Egypt, Greece, Great Britain, Portugal, Nigeria and South Africa. There are more than 1,400 landing sites worldwide, such as Marseille, to which about 500 existing and planned cables are connected. In total, the global network covers 1.4 million kilometers, approximately the diameter of the Sun. And although the network provides uninterrupted internet traffic around the world, a handful of companies from the United States dominate the supply, installation and maintenance of these cables: France, Japan and, more recently, China. Every single day, financial transactions worth more than $10 trillion are transmitted through these cables. Everything from Netflix programs to YouTube videos, top-secret diplomatic cables and military orders passes through this underwater network. Unsurprisingly, cable infrastructure is a geopolitical imperative. Now China and America are using all available instruments of government lending to restore control and establish parity of power in the 21st century. From military might to intelligence gathering, economic warfare, and domestic and international law, nothing goes unnoticed because ruthlessness is as good as strategy when looking for expedient results. In June 2017, Nick Warner, Australia's head of foreign intelligence, traveled to the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific. Australia has led the country since 2003 because it believed it was in trouble and needed help. Australian security personnel were responsible for the police and other important government agencies. Warner had been in charge of this before, and now he wanted to complete the last case. When he got there, he met with the leader of the Solomon Islands by Manasseh Sagavari. They talked about a new long cable, about 4,500 kilometers long, which will connect the capital of Honiara with Sydney in Australia. This cable was of great importance for the region, and at first many Western countries and organizations wanted to help with this. Even the Asian Development Bank has shown interest. But there was a problem. Sagavari chose the Chinese company Huawei Marine to implement the project, and this made Australia worried. The reason was that back in 2013, someone leaked classified information from the United States, and it showed that American equipment similar to what Huawei had could be used for espionage. Western spy agencies were afraid that China might do the same. Shortly after talking to Warner, Sagavari lost his job because of a vote that said he was doing bad things like corruption and taking bribes. In 2019, he returned to his job and wanted to be friends with China in terms of security. But before that happened, the man who took his place, Rick Hu, who used to work at the World Bank, said no to Huawei and let Australia take over. This event, which most people today don't really remember, was one of the first battles in the larger battle for the world's internet cables. These cables are very important because they keep the internet running all over the world, but they have a weak spot. Although they are really long, they are not very thick, about the width of a garden hose. They have different layers and parts. There is a layer of plastic on the outside to keep everything safe. There are strong steel wires underneath for protection. Then there is more plastic to keep out water, followed by more steel wires and plastic. There is a copper or aluminum tube in the middle to protect the cable. There is a special tape around all this to prevent water from entering. Finally, tiny, hair-like fibers are located right in the center which transmit information using laser signals. But when the signal travels a really long distance, it can weaken, so they have to use a device called a repeater every 60 seconds, 70 kilometers to amplify. Some people think that these repeaters can be used for surveillance when they are being manufactured or repaired. Others say that spy agencies can monitor cables in places where they come ashore as a goldmine for espionage. Underwater cables are laid in the ocean using special vessels. There are about 50 such vessels in the world. So working with these cables is really a specialized job. Sometimes there are not enough specialists, so even countries that do not get along with each other may have to turn to each other for help to fix their cables. It doesn't matter if it's a big powerful country or a small one. They may still need help from someone they don't fully trust. When other people work with these cables, there is a risk that they may install devices to steal or distort the data passing through the cable, which would be a big problem. So, when a new cable is made, it's like a move in a big world game. This can either bring countries closer together for security purposes or make someone feel left out. This is how we send information around the world, and this is why these telegrams are so important. Compared to using satellites, which are much more expensive and cannot transmit as much data, cables are the best option. Despite the fact that satellite technology may become better in the future, since 2023, practically no data is transmitted via satellites over long distances, and this is unlikely to change in the near future. But there are concerns that these cables could be used for espionage or be deliberately tampered with. That's why some countries claim that only certain companies can lay these cables in their part of the ocean or take care of them. It used to be different. Governments used to pay for these cables. But in the 2000s, Chinese telecommunications companies like Huawei started visiting places where there was no good internet and helping them. Then Chinese telecommunications companies started doing their own thing in the cable business. By 2015, China had launched a project called the Digital Silk Road to expand its network. They teamed up with Huawei Marine and in just 4 years gained 15% of the entire global market for these cables. For the United States, it was like a wake-up call. It showed them that they need to pay more attention to these things. The Trump administration has become very tough on China. Underwater cables are a bit special because they mix public and private materials. This makes them important for national security and business. The U.S. wanted to control these cables and make sure that American companies were the leaders. Once these cables are in the water, the companies that operate them will be able to make money by allowing other technology companies and internet service providers to use them. This can last for a long time, for example, several decades. Cables going to developing countries can also help American tech giants enter new markets, and the government can use these cables to spy on what is happening. So, the government and business work together. The government paid large bills to make sure that American companies received contracts and not companies from other countries. Major technology companies such as Google, Meta, formerly Facebook and Microsoft, have also joined us, having invested a lot of money in cables since 2016, about $2 billion, which is 15% of all money spent on these cables worldwide. These companies also use most of the world's internet, so by owning cables, they gain even more control. Because of this, Chinese cable companies have not received many contracts. The United States threatened to punish them, so two companies, Global Marine and Huawei, sold their shares in the joint project to another company called Hangtong Group, which changed its name to MTech. But by that time, the damage had already been done. Currently, MTech has only 2 projects in Southeast Asia, and they will not be ready until 2024. So, the US has been able to prevent China from becoming a major player in the global cable business, at least for now. MTech controls only 10% of the known cables, which is much less than the French company ASN and the American company Subcom, which control 41% and 21% of the cables, respectively. But despite the fact that the US is good at planning cables, China is better at repairing them when they break. When there is a problem with the cable, it needs to be fixed quickly. So, whoever can get the job done quickly gets it. China takes care of the cables in the nearby seas, even those belonging to America and Japan. Some people think this might be a chance for espionage. In 2022, Chinese ships repaired cables belonging to AT&T, Verizon and Microsoft in the East China Sea. Then, in May, Microsoft said they were almost certain that hackers, possibly from China, had penetrated their telecommunications systems. China said they had nothing to do with it. Because of things like this, the US wants to keep new cables away from China. In 2020, they launched the so-called Clean Network Initiative, which essentially says that cables should not run directly from America to China. The results speak for themselves. The Bifrost and Etcha submarine cables, scheduled to open in 2024, are laid bypassing disputed waters near China. Like the Apricot cable, it is a 12,000 kilometers long project connecting to the Philippines and Indonesia, which are due to be completed in 2025 in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. However, the geopolitical factors are even more pronounced. In 2021, the World Bank abandoned the project of laying a cable connecting Guam with Micronesia, which was won by the Chinese company Tech. Washington, in fact, disrupted the project. In 2020, the State Department contacted Micronesia expressing disapproval of China's involvement. After that, Washington, Tokyo and Canberra announced that they would finance the laying of a new cable along the same route. By June 2023, these $95 million, $250 billion was allocated. In turn, this raised the status of Guam, which is heavily militarized the overseas territory of the United States, as a large data center. The hostility between America and China is pushing companies to create new routes to transfer data traffic. Since national security and data security are priorities, policies and regulatory frameworks are being developed that completely exclude hostile vendors from the entire ICT ecosystem. Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines and the U.S. island territory of Guam are currently becoming centers of international data traffic. But the competition extends to the Indian Ocean. Here, the main source of disagreement was the CME-WI6 cable, stretched from Singapore to Paris. Initially, the preference for its construction was given to the Chinese Tech. The company's application has been the most competitive to date. At a price of $500 million, it was only a third of the asking price, and it was expected that the project would raise the international prestige of Tech. However, Washington intervened again and made it clear that it would impose sanctions on the project. As expected, this led to trouble. The project was transferred to Subcom, a New Jersey-based firm with deep ties to U.S. intelligence. Subcom itself began its activities in 1955 as a Cold War-era project to strengthen American anti-submarine capabilities. She is currently developing cables for companies such as Google, Amazon, Microsoft and Meta platforms. However, strategically, his most important role is as an exclusive contractor for the U.S. Armed Forces, which he helps control the PLA Navy. Subcom is also in an advantageous position to lay a new cable to Diego Garcia. The Anglo-American naval base of 3,000 people is located on an atoll that is under British control. Its central location allows Washington to project its power onto vital shipping lanes, connecting West Asian oil producers with East Asian oil importers. Currently, the island serves not only as a naval base, but also as a link for the Five Eyes intelligence exchange network, which unites the intelligence services of the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. On the other hand, China's involvement in the Indian Ocean is not that great. They mostly invested in cables before they started having problems with their technology companies. One of the Chinese companies, China Mobile, helped create the Two Africa cable, which connects Africa to Europe. Another company, China Unicom, invested in the sale of 5,800 kilometer-long cable connecting Brazil with Cameroon. This cable started working in 2020, but recently, not many Chinese cables have reached Western countries. One of the rare examples is the Cable of the World, which was launched in December 2022. This is an ultra-long cable, 12,000 kilometers, and it connects Singapore, Kenya and Pakistan with France. It passes through Egypt and Malta. Chinese companies have paid for and built it all, including Tech. France agreed to the project because it wanted to be more independent when it comes to their internet projects, especially against a background of tensions between the United States and China. But over time, splitting cables into separate networks can make them more attractive targets during a war. Despite the fact that some countries, such as Ukraine, are trying to use satellite internet to avoid, there are no problems with the cables. In fact, it is not a very good replacement, at least for several decades. What makes the conflict over these cables even more terrifying is that it's really hard to tell if something bad is really happening to them intentionally or just by accident. And in places where there are many these cables, such as the South China Sea, are also a lot of boats and everything that happens underwater. Sometimes anchors and fishing nets create problems, as do natural phenomena such as landslides and earthquakes. All this can lead to misunderstandings and mistakes. For example, in early 2023 during the year, the internet went down on some islands controlled by Taipei, and within a week 2 main cables connecting the islands to Taiwan were cut. People thought China did it, but later they realized that there was no clear evidence that China was involved or intended to do it. Another problem with these telegrams is that the norms of international law are not very clear to them, and they do not meet modern requirements. The US and China tried to set their own rules, but they weren't very good. The most recent American law on these cables was passed back in 1888. If someone breaks the cable, they can be fined $5,000 and imprisoned for up to 2 years. If he messes up anchors or fishing nets, he can get as little as $500 in fines and 3 months in prison, which is not much. The penalty for repairing something that can cost up to $3 million to repair. Meanwhile, Chinese law is being applied inconsistently. Beijing imposes fines depending on the degree of interference. Intentional or negligent damage to the cable carries a $400 fine, but operators can also be ordered to stop working. Laying unauthorized cables also carries a $28,000 fine, but lax enforcement means that on average, 26 cable defects occur in China every year, more than in any other state. This has accelerated the recent tightening of sand mining, drilling, anchoring and bottom trolling measures. Suspicious vessels' documents on the rupture of military cables were also seized. China insists that the right to delimit cable routes through the continental shelves belongs to the coastal state. In practice, this means notification the State Oceanic Research Administration and receipt of a letter of disagreement from the Plan Navy, which sometimes leads to a change of route. Only after that, the operator can apply for permission to lay their cables in China. After that, they must fully inform the maritime authorities about their activities. However, such a position is likely to cause friction, especially given that Beijing claims that operators operating within the 9-point line, allegedly historically claiming almost the entire South China Sea, must obtain its consent. Both Beijing and Taipei declare China's sovereignty above the sea, despite the decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016, which declared it illegal. Obtaining a permit to work with cables in the USA is a difficult process. Companies have to seek approval from various groups, such as the FCC, the Foreign Exchange Assessment Committee, participation in the United States, the Army Corps of Engineers, and sometimes even in state and local government agencies. Authorities. Dealing with all this paperwork can slow down the process by about 2 years. It may take even more time if a new law is passed restricting the sharing of cable technology in America. There is a saying that laws are like sausages, it is better not to see how they are made. By setting strict rules for obtaining permits, both China and the United States do not follow a large international rule called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. China has agreed to follow this convention, and the United States regards it as customary international law. But the rules they set do not comply with the law of the sea. For example, Article 79 of the Law of the Sea clearly states that each country can lay cables along the ocean floor on the continental shelf. Article 112 goes even further and states that this applies to the high seas beyond the continental shelf. But maritime law also has some problems. It does not provide adequate protection for these cables. The convention does not say that attacking cables in the open ocean is against the law, and it does not place the responsibility on countries to protect cables in their own waters. If these problems are not fixed worldwide, every country you'll have to decide for yourself how to deal with them. This can lead to conflicts. These cables are like the world's information highways, and right now they are becoming an important part of the tension between China and the United States. The wires that will be laid today will determine how the world